The
You
autumn of
look radiant tonight.
1885 arrived
As
in
do
New
you,
York
sir.
City with a
May I have this
crispness
dance?
that
I
cut
would
through
be delighted.
pretension like a knife
Mill
through silk.
argues for the harm
Along
principle.
Fifth
Do you
Avenue,
agree?
the new mansions
Yes,
of
but only if
America's
harm is clearly
industrial titans
defined.
rose like monuments
A
to ambition.
magnificent evening, my
Marble
dear.
Indeed, the
palaces built
music
on
is
steel
enchanting. The
rails and
ambiance
coal
is
dust.
absolutely
Honored
On
divine.
the broken
guests,
backs
welcome.
of men
My fellow
whose names
citizens,
would
we are
never
gathered
grace
at a pivotal
society
moment in
pages.
our history. We
Carnegie
must
Hall
stand
blazed
united,
with gaslight
resolute
on
in
the
our
evening of
purpose.
September 23rd. 300 guests in their finest silks and tailcoats gathered for the annual Railroad Workers Benevolent Fund Gala. Though few among them had ever spoken to an actual railroad worker, the champagne flowed, the orchestra played Strauss, and the wealthy congratulated themselves on their generosity toward the less fortunate. Alexander Rutherford Sterling stood on the raised platform at the hall's eastern end, broad-shouldered and imposing in his evening blacks, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, though he was only 36. His gray eyes surveyed the assembly with the cool assessment of a man accustomed to command. He was handsome in the severe way of classical statues, all sharp angles and controlled power. 3,000 men worked for Sterling Railroad. Senators sought his counsel. His word could make or break fortunes. Tonight he would make a speech about charity. The irony was not lost on him. "Distinguished guests," Alexander began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed hall. Years of Senate testimony had taught him projection. "We gather tonight to discuss the unfortunate reality of industrial progress. The expansion of America's railroad system has created unprecedented prosperity. It has also created casualties. Men injured in service of that progress. Families displaced by necessary advancement." He paused, watching faces nod in comfortable agreement. "It is our duty," he continued, "to provide charitable assistance to those unable to adapt to changing circumstances, those who lack the capacity to evolve with our modern economy. We cannot halt progress for sentiment's sake, but we can soften its impact through measured generosity." The applause was polite, expected, the kind of response given to speeches that confirmed what people already believed. Then a voice rang out from the third row, clear and sharp as breaking glass. "Mr. Sterling, have you read Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of Woman?" The hall fell silent. Heads turned. A young woman had risen from her seat, violet eyes blazing in a face too angular to be conventionally beautiful, but arresting nonetheless. Her gown was deep purple silk, elegant, but clearly last season's fashion. She stood with her chin raised, fearless before 300 pairs of shocked eyes. Alexander blinked. No one interrupted his speeches, certainly not young women quoting 18th century philosophy. "I beg your pardon," he said, his voice cooling several degrees. "Wollstonecraft argued that systemic injustice, not individual failing, creates poverty and suffering," the woman continued, her voice unwavering. "She wrote that those in power attribute to personal weakness what is actually the result of unequal structures. The 47 men who died building your Hudson River Railroad bridge 6 months ago, did they fail to adapt, Mr. Sterling? Or did inadequate safety standards fail them?" The silence deepened. Somewhere a woman gasped. Alexander felt heat rising in his chest. Who was this girl to challenge him publicly? To throw his own tragedy back in his face before New York's elite? "Miss," he began, voice tight with controlled anger. "Ashford, Genevieve Ashford." She curtsied with perfect correctness, the gesture somehow more insulting than insolence. "And before you dismiss me as merely sentimental, I should tell you that I've read your Senate testimony on railroad regulation. Your economic arguments are sound, Mr. Sterling, but your moral premises are deeply flawed." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. This was becoming theater. Alexander descended from the platform, each step measured and deliberate. The assembly parted before him like water. He stopped directly in front of her, using his considerable height advantage. Up close, he could see the intelligence burning in those violet eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw, the slight trembling of her hands that betrayed her nerves beneath the bravado. "And you believe yourself qualified to judge a Harvard-educated senator's moral premises?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I believe anyone with a conscience is qualified, Mr. Sterling." She didn't back down, didn't lower her gaze. "Education doesn't grant a monopoly on ethics. Wealth doesn't immunize against moral blindness." Something flickered in Alexander's chest, surprise perhaps, or recognition, but it was quickly overwhelmed by wounded pride and public humiliation. This woman, this nobody from a bankrupt family, dared to lecture him about morality? He turned to his companion, Lord Marcus Pemberton, but spoke loudly enough for the entire hall to hear. "That woman," he said, each word precisely enunciated, "is utterly unworthy to be any gentleman's wife. No restraint, no proper feminine sensibility. and clearly no understanding of her proper sphere in society. The words landed like stones in still water. Ripples of shock spread through the assembly. Women whispered behind fans. Men shifted uncomfortably. This was scandal. This was gossip that would fuel drawing rooms for weeks. Genevieve Ashford's face paled, but she didn't flinch. She met Alexander Sterling's cold gray eyes with her own unwavering violet gaze. "I would rather be unworthy of you, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, but her voice carried in the terrible silence, than complicit in the comfortable indifference that lets men die for profit. Then she turned and walked from the hall, her back straight, her head high. The crowd parted for her as it had for him. But there was something different in their faces now. Not just shock, something like uncertainty, as if perhaps, just perhaps, the girl in the out-of-fashion gown had spoken a truth they'd all been avoiding. Alexander stood alone in the center of the room, champagne glasses suspended mid-toast, the orchestra silent. He'd won the exchange, surely. Put an impertinent woman in her place. Defended his honor and his business practices. So why did it feel like defeat? His uncle, Cornelius Sterling, appeared at his elbow, a silver-haired patriarch of 70 years, who'd built the railroad empire Alexander now commanded. "That girl," Cornelius murmured, his old eyes sharp with memory, "reminded me of your mother. Catherine had that same fire, that same stubborn courage." He paused. "Your mother would have liked her, Alec." Alexander didn't respond. Couldn't, because somewhere in his chest a wound he thought long scarred had just been reopened, and the woman who'd opened it was already gone. The Ashford townhouse on the Upper West Side had seen better days. The paint peeled at the corners, the iron gate stuck. Inside, furniture purchased during prosperous times now showed its age. Velvet worn thin, gilt dulled, carpets faded by sunlight and time. Genevieve burst through the front door, her mother's voice immediately sharp with anxiety. "Genevieve Catherine Ashford, where have you been? Your father and I returned an hour ago." Evelyn Ashford appeared in the hallway, still in her evening gown, her face tight with worry that shifted instantly to horror when she saw her daughter's expression. "What happened? What did you do?" "I told the truth, Mama." Genevieve's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she removed her gloves. "I told Alexander Sterling that his negligence killed 47 men in front of 300 witnesses." Her mother swayed, actually swayed. Oh God, Genevieve, what have you done?" Judge Theodore Ashford emerged from his study, still in evening dress, his face gray with exhaustion that had become permanent over the past year. He was 52, but looked 70. Financial ruin aged a man. "What's this about Sterling?" His voice was hoarse. Genevieve met her father's eyes. "I challenged him publicly. About the bridge accident, about calling worker deaths acceptable progress." Her father closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were filled with a weariness that broke her heart. "Darling girl," he said softly. "Brave, brilliant, foolish girl. Do you know what you've done? Spoken the truth. You've destroyed your last chance at a decent marriage." He moved to the sideboard, poured whiskey with shaking hands. "No respectable family will have you now. You were already damaged goods. No dowry, no fortune, educated beyond what's proper. But this, publicly humiliating one of the most powerful men in America." He drank. "This ends any hope. I don't want to marry someone who values my silence over my conscience," Genevieve said, but her voice wavered. "What you want, my dear, is a luxury we can no longer afford." Her father's voice was gentle but final. He pulled an envelope from his desk drawer with the careful movement of a man handling something poisonous. "This arrived this morning from the bank. We have 90 days to pay $18,000 or lose the house." The number hit Genevieve like a physical blow. 18,000, an impossible sum. "How?" she whispered. "Bad investments, trusting the wrong partners. The usual story of financial ruin." Her father's laugh was bitter. "I was a good judge, Vivi, but apparently a terrible judge of character when it came to business." Her mother was crying now, quiet tears that she tried to hide behind her handkerchief. Genevieve went to her, wrapped her arms around the woman who'd raised her to be honest, to value education, to think for herself. The woman who was now paying the price for those values. "We'll find a way," Genevieve said, but the words felt hollow. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. At this hour? Past 10 o'clock? Thompson, their aging butler, one of only 4 servants remaining, appeared with a silver tray bearing a single envelope. Heavy cream paper. Expensive, sealed with unfamiliar wax. Judge Ashford opened it with trembling hands. Read. His face went from gray to white. "It's from Victor, No, Percival Blackwood, he said slowly. The real estate investor. He says he's reviewed our financial situation. He has a proposal. He'll call tomorrow to discuss terms. Something cold slithered down Genevieve's spine. Percival Blackwood? I don't know him. I know of him, her father said quietly. Wealthy, widowed. His wife died 5 years ago in an accident. He's been looking to remarry. Someone with breeding, if not fortune. The unspoken words hung in the air like smoke. Someone like you. No, Genevieve said immediately. Absolutely not. We may not have a choice, darling. There's always a choice. But even as she said it, looking at her parents' defeated faces, at the peeling wallpaper and worn furniture, at the evidence of their slow-motion collapse, Genevieve wondered if she was lying. To them or to herself. The New York Public Library reading room was Genevieve's sanctuary. Here, surrounded by thousands of books, she could forget creditors and failing prospects. Here, knowledge mattered more than fortune. 3 days after the Carnegie Hall disaster, she sat at her usual table in the philosophy section, researching predatory lending practices. If she couldn't save herself through marriage, perhaps she could save her family through the law. There had to be precedents, loopholes, some legal mechanism to challenge the debt. She was so absorbed in a treatise on usury statutes that she didn't notice the man who sat down across from her until he spoke. John Stuart Mill's on Liberty. Interesting choice. Genevieve looked up sharply. Alexander Sterling sat opposite her, impeccable in a charcoal suit, holding the very book she'd been about to retrieve from the shelf. His gray eyes were unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. The library's silence pressed down on them like a physical weight. You're the Wollstonecraft woman, he said finally, and you're the man who confuses economic theory with moral absolution. Her voice was cool, but her heart hammered against her ribs. I don't need absolution. He set the book down carefully between them like a gauntlet. My railroad employs 3,000 men, feeds 3,000 families. Employed 47 more until your bridge collapsed. She wouldn't back down. Couldn't. How many families did that feed, Mr. Sterling? His jaw tightened. For a long moment, she thought he'd simply leave. Walk away from this conversation and this impertinent woman who refused to show proper deference. Instead, he did something that shocked her utterly. He answered honestly. Thomas O'Brien, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. 34 years old. Left a wife and 3 children under 8. Michael Sullivan, 28, supporting his elderly mother who was widowed 2 years before. Patrick Murphy, 22, engaged to be married in the fall. He paused, his eyes distant. James McCarthy, William O'Donnell, Robert Fitzgerald, John Kelly. He recited all 47 names, every single one. Ages, circumstances, families left behind. His voice never wavered, but his hands clenched white-knuckled on the table's edge. When he finished, silence fell again. But different now, weighted with shared grief. You know them, Genevieve whispered. All of them. I made it my business to know them. Alexander's voice was rough, raw in a way that suggested he rarely allowed such exposure. After the accident, my engineers blamed faulty materials. My accountants blamed cost overruns. Everyone had an excuse, but those men were still dead. So I went to every funeral, learned every name, made sure their families received compensation beyond what the law required. He looked up, and Genevieve saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Guilt, deep, bone-level guilt that no amount of charity could erase. It doesn't bring them back, she said softly. No, he exhaled slowly, but it makes me less likely to cut corners in the future. Fear of bad press is a poor moral teacher, Miss Ashford. But guilt? Guilt is remarkably effective. Despite herself, Genevieve felt her anger softening. This wasn't the cold industrial magnate who'd insulted her. This was something more complicated. A man struggling with the weight of power and its consequences. Why are you here, she asked. I was researching labor legislation. He gestured to his stack of books, treatises on worker safety, European factory regulations, union organizing laws. Trying to draft a bill for the Connecticut legislature. Something that would mandate safety inspections for all railroad construction. She blinked. That's actually quite progressive. Your words at Carnegie Hall weren't wrong, Miss Ashford. Just poorly timed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm arrogant and defensive when challenged publicly. But I'm not incapable of self-examination. You quoted Wollstonecraft at me, so I read Wollstonecraft. And Mill, and several other philosophers you'd probably approve of. Genevieve stared at him. You read Wollstonecraft because I mentioned it? You made me curious. That's a dangerous thing to do to a man who studied political philosophy at Harvard. He leaned forward slightly. Here's what I discovered. You were right about systemic injustice. Individual workers can't negotiate safety standards when they're desperate for employment. The power imbalance is too great. Therefore, the law must intervene to create baseline protections. Classic Mill, preventing harm to others justifies state intervention even in private contracts. He was talking philosophy. With her, as if she were an intellectual equal rather than an impertinent woman who'd embarrassed him. That's, Genevieve struggled for words, that's exactly right. But most industrialists argue that any regulation violates freedom of contract. Most industrialists haven't actually read Mill beyond selective quotes that support their profits. Alexander's smile was wry. Turns out having 47 men's names memorized makes you reconsider your interpretation of utilitarian ethics. They talked for 3 hours. They debated Mill's harm principle versus utilitarian calculus, argued about whether individual liberty could ever be truly separate from collective good, discussed Kant's categorical imperative, Bentham's felicific calculus, Wollstonecraft's arguments for women's education. Genevieve cited passages from memory. Alexander countered with legal precedents and political realities. It was the most intellectually stimulating conversation Genevieve had experienced since leaving Vassar, possibly ever. When the library's closing bell rang at 6, both looked up in genuine surprise. Hours had vanished like minutes. I should go, Genevieve said reluctantly, gathering her books. Alexander stood when she did, old-fashioned courtesy ingrained by birth and breeding. You studied at Vassar? Political philosophy? Graduated top of my class. She couldn't keep the pride from her voice. Not that it matters. Women can't practice law or hold office. My education is essentially decorative. That's a criminal waste of extraordinary intellect, Alexander said, and he sounded genuinely angry about it. You should be teaching, or writing, or advising senators on legislation. I should be many things, Mr. Sterling, but I am what circumstances allow. She moved toward the door, but his voice stopped her. Wait, Miss Ashford. She turned. Alexander was watching her with an odd expression. Curiosity mixed with calculation, mixed with something she couldn't quite identify. Your father, he said slowly, Judge Theodore Ashford. He's facing significant financial difficulties, isn't he? Genevieve's spine stiffened. How do you know that? I make it my business to know things. He stepped closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. $18,000 owed to New York Mercantile Bank. 90-day deadline. And a man named Percival Blackwood circling like a vulture. Cold dread washed over her. You've been investigating my family? Not investigating, just paying attention. He met her eyes. After Carnegie Hall, I asked some questions. Wanted to understand why you'd risk social suicide to challenge me publicly. Found out about your father's situation. Then I made it my business to learn about Percival Blackwood. His expression darkened. Miss Ashford, you cannot marry that man under any circumstances. I wasn't aware my marriage prospects were your concern, Mr. Sterling. They are when the man proposing is a probable murderer. The world tilted. Genevieve grabbed the bookshelf for support. What? Alexander glanced around the empty reading room, then pulled a thin folder from his leather satchel. My investigator compiled this. Blackwood's first wife, Margaret, died 5 years ago. Officially, fell down the stairs. But the coroner was Blackwood's personal friend. The inquest lasted less than an hour. Margaret's own family refused to attend the funeral. He opened the folder, newspaper clippings, court documents, a grainy photograph of a young woman with sad eyes. Since then, Blackwood has married twice more. Both wives died within 2 years. Both ruled accidents. Both times, Blackwood inherited substantial property. Alexander's voice was grim. And 6 months ago, 2 young women who worked on his Connecticut estate simply vanished. No bodies found, no investigation. The local magistrate owes Blackwood $12,000 in gambling debts. Genevieve felt sick. How is he not in prison? Money buys silence. Power buys protection. Alexander closed the folder. He's currently $42,000 in debt to a loan shark named Silas Kane. Kane is known for killing people who don't pay. Blackwood needs money desperately. Your family's property, once consolidated through marriage, could be mortgaged to raise the capital he needs. So he marries me, murders me, takes the property, and pays his debt. Genevieve's voice sounded distant to her own ears. How tidy. Miss Ashford, why are you telling me this? She looked up at him, violet eyes blazing with sudden fury. You called me unworthy. You humiliated me publicly. Why do you care if I marry a murderer?" Alexander flinched as if she'd struck him. "Good. Because I was wrong," he said quietly. "About you. About many things. You challenged me when no one else dared. You forced me to examine assumptions I'd held for years. And these past 3 hours, talking with you about philosophy and justice and the proper role of power in society." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I haven't had a conversation this intellectually engaging since my wife died." The mention of his wife hung in the air between them. "I heard you were widowed," Genevieve said softly. "I'm sorry. Evelyn died 3 years ago, childbirth complications." His voice was carefully neutral, the grief locked away behind aristocratic control. "I was in Washington when it happened. Senate session. She went into labor early. I wasn't there." Silence. "That must have been very difficult." "It was my choice." The words came out harsh, almost angry. "My career over my family. That was my choice. And she paid the price." Genevieve understood then. The guilt over the 47 workers wasn't just about them. It was about every choice he'd made that prioritized power and position over the people who depended on him. "And now you're trying to save families because you couldn't save yours," she said gently. Alexander's eyes snapped to hers, startled by her perception. "Is that so transparent?" "It's human." She took a careful step closer. "And it's good. Guilt that drives justice is redemption, Mr. Sterling." "Nathaniel." The name came out rough. "No, Alexander, if you're going to understand me, use my name. Alexander." "Alexander." She tested it. Something shifted in the air between them, became more intimate, more dangerous. "I have a proposal," he said abruptly. "Not marriage, partnership." Genevieve blinked. "I don't understand." "Blackwood has bought your father's debt. I verified it this afternoon. He owns you now, legally speaking, unless," and Alexander paused, "unless you were already committed elsewhere. If you and I were to announce a courtship, Blackwood would lose his leverage. I could buy your father's debt under fair terms, low interest, flexible timeline. In 6 months, we part amicably. You're free, your family is safe, and Blackwood is forced to find another victim." It was so calculated, so cold, so perfectly logical. "Why would you do this?" Genevieve asked. "What do you gain?" "Peace of mind." He met her eyes. "I failed those 47 men. Let me not fail your family too. This is guilt driving you." "Yes." "Is that inadequate motivation?" Genevieve considered. A practical arrangement, a business transaction disguised as romance. 6 months of pretending to court a man who'd publicly humiliated her. It should have been repulsive. But she thought of her father's gray face, her mother's quiet tears, the peeling wallpaper and shrinking household, the very real possibility that she'd be forced to marry a murderer to save them. "As equals," she said firmly, "partners, not protector and protected. I won't be managed like a helpless woman who needs a man to solve her problems." Alexander's eyebrows rose. Then slowly he smiled, a real smile that transformed his severe face into something almost boyish. "Partners," he agreed, "equals in all things. You have my word." He extended his hand for a businesslike shake. Genevieve took it. The moment their palms touched, electricity shot up her arm. Pure physical awareness that had nothing to do with philosophy or justice or practical arrangements. Alexander felt it too. She saw his eyes widen fractionally, saw the slight catch in his breath. They stood there, hands clasped, the library shadows lengthening around them, both suddenly aware that this partnership might be more complicated than either had anticipated. The next morning, society pages across New York exploded with speculation. Alexander Rutherford Sterling, the man who'd publicly declared Genevieve Ashford unworthy just 5 days earlier, had been seen with her at the New York Public Library, alone, for 3 hours, emerging only when the closing bell rang, both looking flushed and animated. The gossip spread like wildfire through drawing rooms and gentlemen's clubs. What could it mean? Was Sterling courting the very woman he'd insulted? Had he lost his senses? Or was there something about Miss Ashford that society had failed to perceive? Genevieve read the speculation over breakfast, her coffee growing cold. The Times described her as a young woman of surprising intellectual accomplishment, though limited fortune. The Herald called her the unlikely object of Mr. Sterling's apparent fascination. The Tribune wondered if the railroad magnate has discovered virtues in Miss Ashford that his hasty public judgment overlooked. "They make us sound like characters in a penny novel," she muttered. Rosalind Bennett appeared in the doorway, her dark curls escaping their pins as usual, eyes bright with curiosity. Rosalind was 23, the daughter of Manhattan's most prominent attorney and Genevieve's closest friend since childhood. Where Genevieve was all sharp angles and intensity, Rosalind was curves and practicality, a perfect balance. Vivi, I came the moment I read the papers. Rosalind swept into the morning room, bringing the scent of autumn air and expensive perfume. You were alone with Alexander Sterling for 3 hours? At a library? Doing what exactly? Discussing John Stuart Mill's harm principle. Rosalind blinked. I'm sorry, you what? It's complicated. Genevieve poured her friend coffee, explained the arrangement in low tones while her mother was safely occupied upstairs. The fake courtship, Blackwood's danger, the 6-month timeline. When she finished, Rosalind sat back, her expression unreadable. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, she said slowly, or the most dangerous. Possibly both. It's practical, nothing more. Oh, darling, Rosalind's smile was knowing. The way you're blushing suggests otherwise. I am not. You touched hands and felt electricity. You debated for 3 hours and lost track of time. He memorized 47 names because guilt haunts him. Rosalind ticked off points on her fingers. Either you're lying to me or lying to yourself. Which is it? Before Genevieve could answer, Thompson appeared with the morning's correspondence on a silver tray. Among the usual bills and social invitations sat one envelope that made her breath catch. Heavy cream paper. The Sterling family seal in dark blue wax. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Miss Ashford, if you are amenable, I would call upon you and your father this afternoon at 3 o'clock to formalize our arrangement. I have taken the liberty of having my attorney draw up appropriate documents regarding your family's debt. I trust you will find the terms acceptable. Please wear something you would wear to be courted by a man of serious intentions. Society will be watching. Your partner in this endeavor, Alexander Sterling. He wants to make it official, Genevieve breathed. Rosalind leaned over to read, then whistled low. That man moves quickly when he decides on something. What will you wear? I don't have anything appropriate. Everything's out of fashion or worn thin. Then we're going shopping. Rosalind was already on her feet. My father gave me an obscene clothing allowance for my birthday. We'll use it. If you're going to pretend to court one of New York's most eligible bachelors, you need to look the part. 2 hours later, Genevieve stood in the private fitting room of Madame Rousseau's exclusive dress shop on Fifth Avenue, feeling like an imposter. The emerald silk gown Rosalind had chosen hugged her figure perfectly. Modern cut, fashionable bustle, delicate lace at throat and wrists. It cost more than the Ashfords spent on household expenses in 3 months. I can't accept this, Genevieve protested. You can and you will. Rosalind was firm. Consider it an investment in your future. Besides, seeing you in current fashion instead of last year's rejects will drive society gossips absolutely mad with speculation. At precisely 3 o'clock, Alexander Sterling's carriage pulled up outside the Ashford townhouse. Genevieve watched from the drawing room window, her heart hammering beneath the emerald silk. He emerged in impeccable afternoon dress, charcoal coat, dove gray waistcoat, perfectly tied cravat. Every inch the wealthy industrialist paying court to a respectable young lady. The performance had begun. Judge Ashford received Alexander in the front parlor, the room they saved for important visitors. Genevieve's mother hovered nervously, clearly uncertain how to treat the man who'd insulted her daughter 1 week and courted her the next. Judge Ashford, Alexander bowed with perfect correctness. Mrs. Ashford, thank you for receiving me. Mr. Sterling, her father's voice was wary. Your letter suggested you wished to discuss matters of some delicacy. Indeed, Alexander produced a leather portfolio, extracted several documents. I've reviewed your financial situation, sir. The debt currently held by Percival Blackwood. I believe the terms are unconscionable and likely violate New York lending statutes. He spread the papers across the parlor table with the efficiency of a man accustomed to business negotiations. I'm prepared to purchase that debt at fair market value and restructure the repayment terms. 5% interest instead of Blackwood's 18. 15-year timeline with no balloon payment. The house remains yours throughout. Judge Ashford's hands shook as he examined the documents. This is extraordinarily generous, Mr. Sterling. Why would you do this? Alexander glanced at Genevieve, who'd been standing silent by the fireplace. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, understanding perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Because your daughter has given me cause to reconsider many of my assumptions, sir. And because Percival Blackwood is a dangerous man who should not be rewarded for predatory behavior. But what do you gain from this arrangement? The opportunity to know your daughter better. Alexander's voice softened slightly. With your permission, I would like to court her, properly, publicly, to determine if we might suit one another despite our unfortunate introduction. The room fell silent. Evelyn Ashford's hand flew to her throat. Judge Ashford stared at the papers, then at Alexander, then at his daughter. You want to court Genevieve after you called her unworthy? I was wrong. Alexander said it simply without justification or excuse. Your daughter is extraordinary, Judge Ashford. She challenged me to be better, to think beyond my own narrow perspective. That kind of courage is rare, and it is the opposite of unworthiness. Genevieve felt heat rising in her cheeks. He was good at this. Too good. She had to remind herself it was performance. Strategy, not real. But the way he looked at her felt real. Her father examined the loan documents with an attorney's careful eye, found them flawless, generous beyond reason, probably more favorable than any bank would offer. This appears legitimate, he said slowly. But I don't understand, Mr. Sterling. This is an enormous financial commitment based on what? A few hours of conversation? Based on respect. Alexander met the older man's eyes. I respect your daughter's intellect. I respect her courage. And I respect that you raised a woman who values truth over comfort. Those qualities are worth far more than $18,000. It was the perfect answer, sincere enough to be believable, practical enough to satisfy a lawyer's skepticism. Judge Ashford looked at his daughter. Vivi, what do you want? The question surprised her. In most families, fathers decided such matters without consulting daughters. But Theodore Ashford had always treated her as if her opinions mattered. I think, Genevieve said carefully, that Mr. Sterling and I should explore whether we are compatible. He's right that our introduction was unfortunate. Perhaps we both deserve the chance to start again. Her father signed the papers. The announcement appeared in all major newspapers the following morning. Alexander Sterling and Miss Genevieve Ashford are pleased to announce their courtship. The couple requests privacy as they become better acquainted. Society reacted with predictable hysteria. The Vanderbilts sent a congratulatory note. The Astors raised eyebrows, but maintained polite silence. Lesser families buzzed with speculation. Was this a love match? A business arrangement? Had Sterling taken leave of his senses? The invitations began arriving within hours. Opera performances, dinner parties, garden luncheons. Everyone wanted the scandalous couple at their events. But the invitation that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Percival Blackwood was hosting a 5-day house party at his Connecticut estate. 20 guests, autumn hunting, evening entertainments. A chance for New York's elite to enjoy the countryside before winter set in. Both Alexander Sterling and Genevieve Ashford were cordially invited. It's a trap, Rosalind said flatly, examining the heavy invitation in the Ashfords' morning room. Blackwood wants you both under his roof where he can manipulate the situation. Or expose the arrangement as fake, Genevieve added. 5 days is a long time to maintain a performance. Alexander, who joined them for tea, studied the invitation with narrowed eyes. Actually, this could work in our favor. Blackwood's estate is where his first wife died, where those 2 women disappeared. If we can access his private papers, find evidence, you want to investigate him during a house party? Rosalind's eyes lit up. That's either brilliant or insane. Often the same thing, Alexander smiled. The local magistrate won't touch Blackwood, but if we can gather enough evidence to take to Hartford authorities, to the state attorney general, we could end him. Genevieve felt fierce satisfaction at the thought. Not just save ourselves, actually stop him from hurting anyone else. Precisely. Alexander leaned forward, his expression intent. But it means 5 days of very convincing courtship. Society will be watching. Blackwood will be watching. We'll need to appear genuinely interested in each other. How hard can that be, Rosalind murmured, too quietly for anyone but Genevieve to hear. You already are. Genevieve kicked her friend's ankle under the table. They departed for Connecticut on Friday morning, late October sunshine turning the Hudson Valley into a riot of crimson and gold. The Sterling carriage was considerably more comfortable than the rattling public coach Genevieve usually took. Leather seats, lap blankets, a small stack of books Alexander had thoughtfully provided. Mill's Principles of Political Economy, she said, examining the volumes. Kant's Critique of Practical Reason, and Jane Austen. I thought you might appreciate the irony, Alexander said from the opposite seat. Austin wrote extensively about women trapped by economic circumstance, forced into marriages for survival. You're living a slightly inverted version of a Bennett sisters' dilemma. Genevieve laughed despite herself. Am I Elizabeth or Jane in this scenario? Elizabeth, obviously. Too clever by half and entirely too willing to challenge men of superior rank. His eyes crinkled with humor. Though I hope I'm a better man than Darcy, at least my first proposal will be properly respectful. The words hung in the air. First proposal, as if there would be a real one after the fake courtship ended. Genevieve looked away, watched autumn countryside roll past the window. Tell me about Blackwood's estate, the layout, where we might find useful information. They spent the 3-hour journey planning strategy. Alexander sketched a rough map of Blackwood Manor from memory, a sprawling Tudor revival mansion with modern additions. 20 bedrooms, a library, a ballroom, extensive grounds including stables and a groundskeeper's cottage. His private study is on the second floor east wing, Alexander explained. That's where he'd keep sensitive documents. But it's also the most difficult to access without being seen. What about servants, Genevieve asked. They see everything in a great house. Blackwood runs a small staff, only 6 permanent servants. He brings in temporary help for large parties, but doesn't trust them with anything important. Rosalind, who'd insisted on accompanying them as chaperone, made notes in her little leather journal. Her father's training as an attorney had rubbed off. She thought like an investigator. We need to befriend the housekeeper, Rosalind said. Middle-aged women are often invisible to men like Blackwood. They see everything but are rarely questioned. If anyone knows where bodies are buried, literally or figuratively, it's her. The phrase bodies are buried sent a chill through the carriage despite the afternoon warmth. Blackwood Manor rose from manicured grounds like something from a Gothic novel. All dark stone and sharp angles. Windows that caught the late afternoon sun like watching eyes. Beautiful in a severe way, intimidating by design. Percival Blackwood himself stood on the front steps to greet arriving guests. 42 years old, handsome in a practiced way, silver threading dark hair, expensive clothes tailored to emphasize his athletic build. His smile was warm, his eyes were cold. Miss Ashford, he took her hand, held it a fraction too long. How delightful to finally host you at my home. And Mr. Sterling, I'm so pleased you could both attend. His voice carried subtle mockery, as if he knew their courtship was performance, as if he found their attempt to outmaneuver him amusing. Thank you for the invitation, Alexander said smoothly, positioning himself slightly between Blackwood and Genevieve, a subtle claim of possession that any observer would read as masculine protectiveness. Other guests were arriving. Cordelia Whitmore, a beautiful widow of 28, emerged from a carriage in elegant traveling dress. Society considered her the perfect match for Alexander. Wealthy, well-connected, impeccably mannered, she greeted them with genuine warmth that made Genevieve feel guilty for the deception. Miss Ashford, how wonderful to see you again. Cordelia took both Genevieve's hands in hers. I must tell you how much I admire what you said at Carnegie Hall. Someone needed to challenge Sterling's assumptions. That you did it so eloquently was magnificent. Genevieve blinked. She'd expected censure from a woman like Cordelia. Instead, she received praise. You're very kind, Genevieve managed. I'm honest. Cordelia's smile was mischievous. And I'm delighted Alexander finally found someone who won't simply agree with everything he says. He needs challenge. Needs someone who sees him as a man rather than a title and fortune. She glanced meaningfully at Alexander, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Cordelia, he began. Oh, don't worry, I harbor no wounded feelings. Cordelia laughed. My aunt has been trying to match us for years. We're perfectly unsuitable for each other, and we both know it. I want adventure and passion. You want, she considered Genevieve thoughtfully, intellectual partnership, moral challenge, someone who makes you better. I think you found her. Then she swept into the house, leaving Genevieve and Alexander staring after her. She's extraordinarily perceptive, Genevieve said faintly. Terrifyingly so. Alexander offered his arm. Shall we? The house party included 20 guests, carefully selected to represent New York's various power centers, old money and new, political connections and business titans. Everyone who mattered in the small, vicious world of Gilded Age society. Dinner that first night was an elaborate affair. 7 courses served on china so delicate it seemed transparent. Crystal that caught candlelight and threw rainbows across damask tablecloths. Conversation flowed around topics designed to exclude those without proper breeding. European travels, familial connections, shared experiences at exclusive schools. Genevieve had been seated between a pompous banker who spoke only of his recent trip to Paris and an elderly gentleman who'd fallen asleep before the second course. Across the table, Alexander made polite conversation with Cordelia and a railroad investor, but his eyes kept finding Genevieve's, small moments of connection that felt more intimate than they should. After dinner, Blackwood announced entertainment. We've prepared a little diversion in the drawing room. Some parlor games to help us all become better acquainted. The drawing room had been arranged with small tables, each holding an intricate wooden puzzle box, Chinese puzzle balls, German trick locks, mechanical contraptions that required both logic and dexterity to solve. We'll compete in pairs, Blackwood explained, his voice carrying easily across the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, choose your partners. The first pair to solve their puzzle wins a prize. And more importantly, demonstrates the kind of intellectual harmony that makes for successful partnerships. The emphasis on partnerships was deliberate. Everyone understood he was forcing Alexander and Genevieve to either work together, proving their courtship, or separate, revealing it as sham. May I? Alexander materialized at Genevieve's elbow, offering his hand. They took their place at a corner table. The puzzle box before them was particularly complex, a sphere of interlocking wooden rings that somehow contained a smaller sphere inside. The goal was to extract the inner sphere without breaking the outer rings. This is going to require both spatial reasoning and patience, Genevieve murmured, examining the contraption. Fortunately, I have experience with complex systems, and you have experience finding patterns others miss. Alexander's fingers brushed hers as they both reached for the puzzle. That electric awareness sparked again. They worked in surprising harmony. Alexander tested the ring's movement systematically while Genevieve observed, noting which combinations produced results. When she suggested rotating the third ring counterclockwise while holding the second steady, he followed her intuition without question. Something clicked deep within the mechanism. The outer rings are misdirection, Genevieve breathed, studying the puzzle with new understanding. The solution isn't about manipulating them. It's about finding the pattern in how they're already arranged. Look, every third ring has a slightly different grain. If we align those, she demonstrated, her fingers moving with growing confidence. Alexander watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and something warmer. The inner sphere released with a satisfying click. They'd solved it first, by a considerable margin. Polite applause rippled through the room. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well done, Miss Ashford, Mr. Sterling. You worked together remarkably well. His tone suggested this was somehow suspicious rather than praiseworthy. As other couples finished their puzzles, Blackwood called for attention. I'm pleased to announce that tomorrow we'll enjoy riding and lawn games. But tonight I hope you'll indulge me in sharing some wonderful news. He paused dramatically. As many of you know, I've been in discussion with Judge Ashford regarding his daughter's future. I'm delighted to announce that we've reached an understanding. Miss Ashford has agreed to consider my suit seriously. We hope to formalize our engagement before this party concludes. The room exploded in shocked whispers. Genevieve felt the blood drain from her face. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. Her father had never agreed to such a thing, couldn't have, since Alexander had purchased the debt. But Blackwood was forcing her hand publicly. If she contradicted him, she'd humiliate her father. If she remained silent, society would assume consent. Alexander stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against hardwood. The sound cut through the murmuring voices like a knife. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Blackwood. His voice was ice and iron. Miss Ashford cannot consider your suit, as she and I have been developing an understanding of our own. Every eye in the room swiveled from Alexander to Genevieve to Blackwood. Is that so? Blackwood's smile was venomous. How interesting, given that you publicly declared her unworthy just 2 weeks ago. I was wrong, Alexander said it clearly, without hesitation, letting everyone hear. Miss Ashford is extraordinary, and I'm courting her with every serious intention. The room erupted in chaos, guests talking over each other, scandalized and thrilled in equal measure. This was gossip that would fuel drawing rooms for months. Genevieve found her voice. Mr. Sterling is correct. We've been corresponding privately since our initial meeting. I apologize if there was any confusion, Mr. Blackwood, but I never agreed to consider your proposal. Blackwood's mask slipped for just an instant. Pure rage flashed across his features before smooth courtesy returned. Of course, my sincere apologies for the misunderstanding. He raised his glass in a toast that felt like a threat. To Mr. Sterling and Miss Ashford, then. May your understanding prove fruitful. The evening dissolved into awkward conversation and speculation. Genevieve felt trapped in a nightmare of social performance, smiling until her face ached, accepting congratulations for a courtship that was carefully constructed fiction. When the party finally retired for the evening, Alexander walked Genevieve to her room, a beautiful chamber on the second floor with windows overlooking the gardens. That was, she began. A disaster, he finished. Blackwood knows we're lying, or suspects strongly enough that he's testing us. We need to be more convincing. Yes. Alexander hesitated in the doorway, candlelight casting shadows across his angular face. Genevieve, there's something you should know. The investigation I've been running, my people found something today. He pulled a folded telegram from his pocket. Genevieve's hand flew to her mouth. Oh, God. We have evidence now, real evidence, but we need more. A confession, ideally, or documentation connecting Blackwood to her death. Alexander's jaw was tight. I'm going to search his study tomorrow during the hunting party, while everyone's occupied outdoors. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. We're partners, remember? Equals. Genevieve stepped closer, meeting his eyes with fierce determination. You don't protect me by excluding me. We do this together or not at all. For a long moment, Alexander simply looked at her. Then slowly he smiled. You're going to be the death of me, Genevieve Ashford. Or the making of you. She smiled back. Good night, Alexander. Good night. But neither moved. They stood in the doorway, candlelight flickering between them, awareness crackling like static electricity. Genevieve could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating in his throat. Alexander leaned forward slightly. Just slightly. Testing. Genevieve's breath caught. Was he going to kiss her? Did she want him to? Yes, whispered a traitorous voice in her mind. Yes, absolutely yes. But footsteps sounded in the corridor, a servant making evening rounds. Alexander stepped back quickly. The moment shattered. Tomorrow, he said, quietly. We searched together. Then he was gone, leaving Genevieve alone with her racing heart and the dangerous realization that this arrangement was becoming decidedly less fake with each passing hour. The morning dawned cold and crisp, autumn asserting itself with frost on the windows and fear rolling across Blackwood's manicured grounds. Most guests assembled for the hunting party, a chance for the men to demonstrate their skill with firearms and the ladies to admire from a safe distance. Alexander made a show of joining the hunters, rifle over his shoulder playing the part of gentleman sportsman, but he'd arranged everything carefully. His manservant would create a distraction. The hunting party would be delayed by misplaced ammunition. That gave them perhaps 90 minutes while everyone was occupied outdoors. Genevieve pleaded a headache, remaining behind while Rosalind joined the hunting party to keep watch and signal if anyone returned early. The plan was simple. Too simple, perhaps. At precisely 10 o'clock, while servants busied themselves preparing the elaborate lunch that would follow the hunt, Genevieve slipped from her room. The second-floor corridor was blessedly empty. Blackwood's private study was at the eastern end, a room he'd pointedly not included in the house tour. The door was locked. Genevieve had expected this. She pulled 2 hairpins from her carefully arranged coiffure, bent them with practiced efficiency. Her misspent youth included a summer when she and Rosalind had obsessively practiced lockpicking after reading about it in a detective novel. Judge Ashford had been horrified. Her mother had despaired. But right now, those skills were invaluable. The lock clicked open after 30 seconds. The study was exactly what she'd expected from a man like Blackwood. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, a massive desk positioned to dominate the room, hunting trophies mounted on walls, dead animals frozen in positions of savage grace, and papers everywhere. Filing cabinets, desk drawers, a small safe built into the wall behind a painting. Genevieve started with the desk, working methodically through drawers, financial records, business correspondence, letters from the magistrate that confirmed Blackwood's hold over him through gambling debts. Then, in a locked drawer at the bottom, she picked this lock too. She found it. A diary, leather-bound, written in Blackwood's own hand. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The entries were sporadic, dating back 5 years. She flipped to 1880, the year Margaret Price disappeared. June 15th, 1880. The girl is becoming a problem. Threatens to expose our arrangement if I don't marry her. Foolish child. As if I would bind myself to a pregnant servant. June 17th, 1880. M continues her threats. Spoke to Kane about solutions. He suggested permanent ones. June 20th, 1880. Problem resolved. The well behind the groundskeeper's cottage serves admirably. Sheriff Daniels has been compensated for his discretion. Note, verified groundskeeper's loyalty may require additional management. Genevieve felt sick. He'd written it down. Actually documented his murder in his private diary as casually as recording the weather. She turned pages, found entries about his wives, clinical descriptions of their accidents, insurance payouts, property transfers, all laid out like business transactions. The man wasn't just a murderer. He was a psychopath who documented his crimes like an accountant tracking expenses. She needed to get this diary out. Evidence, proof, something that could finally bring him to justice. But first, she needed to document it. Genevieve pulled paper from her pocket. She'd come prepared and began copying the most damning entries word for word. Her handwriting was rapid but legible. Years of note-taking at Vassar paying unexpected dividends. She was halfway through the June 1880 entries when the door opened behind her. Percival Blackwood stood in the doorway, rifle still in hand from the hunt. His face wore an expression of terrible calm. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, "I really wish you hadn't done this." Time slowed to the rhythm of a nightmare. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs as Percival Blackwood stepped into his study, closing the door behind him with careful deliberation. The rifle rested casually across his forearm, not quite pointed at her, but the threat was unmistakable. "The hunting party," Genevieve managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "They'll notice you're gone. I told them I was retrieving better ammunition." Blackwood's smile was pleasant, as if they were discussing weather rather than murder. "We have perhaps 10 minutes before anyone misses me. More than enough time for what needs to happen." He moved deeper into the room, positioning himself between Genevieve and the door. Escape routes vanished with each of his measured steps. "You've been reading my private diary." He gestured to the leather volume clutched in her hands. "I'm curious what you found so fascinating." "A confession," Genevieve said flatly. "No point in pretending ignorance now. Multiple confessions. Margaret Price. Your wives, all documented in your own handwriting." "Ah." Blackwood nodded as if she'd confirmed something he already knew. "And you thought to steal it? Bring it to the authorities? Dear girl, you've made a serious miscalculation." He set the rifle down on his desk, within his reach, not hers, and pulled a small pistol from his coat pocket. Modern, efficient, deadly at close range. "The diary doesn't leave this room," he continued conversationally. "Neither do you, I'm afraid. Not alive. A tragic accident during the house party. Such things happen. Perhaps you fell from your balcony, or perhaps you encountered an intruder. Violence is so unpredictable." Genevieve's mind raced. The window was too far. The door blocked. Her only weapon was words. "Alexander knows I'm here," she said. "If something happens to me, he'll know it was you." "Will he? You told everyone you had a headache, stayed behind while the rest of us hunted. Who's to say you didn't wander off alone and encounter misfortune?" Blackwood smiled. "Besides, Sterling can suspect all he wants. Proving it is another matter entirely. As you've discovered, I'm quite skilled at making problems disappear." He raised the pistol. The door exploded inward. Alexander burst through, shoulder first, wood splintering around the lock. He took in the scene instantly. Genevieve trapped, Blackwood armed, the diary clutched in her hands. "Step away from her," Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. Blackwood swung the pistol toward him. "Or what, Sterling? You'll assault me in my own home? Witnesses will confirm you broke down my door. I was simply defending myself from an intruder. I'm not the one holding two people at gunpoint. No, you're the one who brought his mistress to search my private papers. Trespassing, theft, conspiracy." Blackwood's voice remained pleasant, rational. "I'm within my rights." For a terrible moment, no one moved. 3 people frozen in a tableau of potential violence. Then Genevieve saw it. Alexander's eyes flickered to the rifle on the desk. Blackwood noticed the glance, shifted slightly to block access. "You killed Margaret Price," Genevieve said suddenly, loudly, drawing Blackwood's attention back to her. "Drowned her in the well, buried her near the groundskeeper's cottage. It's all written here." "Ancient history." Blackwood shrugged. "A servant girl who got above herself. No one cares." "Your wives, then. 3 women dead in 5 years. All accidents, all leaving you substantially wealthier. Unfortunate coincidences. Documented murder." Genevieve held up the diary. "In your own hand, dates, methods, payments to the sheriff for his silence. This is evidence, Blackwood. Real evidence that no amount of money can erase. Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes. Not fear exactly. Calculation. That diary means nothing without witnesses, he said slowly. And witnesses can be unreliable, especially dead ones. He raised the pistol, aimed directly at Genevieve's chest. Alexander moved. He lunged forward, not at Blackwood, but at the desk, grabbing the rifle. Blackwood fired. The pistol's report was deafening in the confined space, but Alexander's movement had thrown off his aim. The bullet buried itself in wood paneling. Alexander swung the rifle like a club, catching Blackwood across the shoulder. The impact sent both men crashing into a bookshelf. Leather volumes rained down as they grappled for the pistol. Genevieve ran for the door, diary clutched to her chest. She could get help. Alert the other guests. The servants. Anyone. But Blackwood's hand shot out, grabbed her ankle. She went down hard, the diary skittering across the floor. Pain exploded through her shoulder where it struck the ground. "No, you don't," Blackwood hissed, dragging her back. Alexander kicked him in the ribs. Once. Twice. Hard enough that Blackwood's grip loosened. Genevieve scrambled away, crawling toward the diary. Behind her, the two men fought with brutal efficiency. This wasn't the romanticized combat of novels. It was ugly, desperate, the sound of fists on flesh, grunts of pain, furniture crashing. Genevieve's fingers closed around the diary just as the door burst open again. Rosalind stood there, eyes wide with horror. Behind her, two of Blackwood's servants and several male guests drawn by the gunshot. "He tried to kill us," Genevieve gasped, holding up the diary. "It's all here. Confessions, Margaret Price, his wives, everything." The audience changed everything. Witnesses now. People who would have to acknowledge what they'd seen. Blackwood couldn't make them all disappear. He seemed to realize this simultaneously. Shoved Alexander away, stumbled to his feet, blood streaming from a split lip. For a moment, he looked like he might continue fighting. Then his shoulders sagged fractionally. Defeat settling in like a weight. "You can't prove anything," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "We already have." Alexander stood slowly, favoring his left side where Blackwood had landed several solid blows. "My investigators found Margaret Price's body yesterday. Exactly where your diary says you buried her. The state attorney general is already reviewing the evidence." Blackwood's face went gray. "This was all a setup," he breathed. "The courtship, the house party, everything designed to trap me." "Not everything." Alexander glanced at Genevieve, something complicated in his expression. Some parts became unexpectedly real. Before Blackwood could respond, the sound of horses approaching at speed drifted through the broken window. Moments later, two uniformed men appeared in the doorway. Connecticut State Constables, badges gleaming. "Percival Blackwood," the taller one said, "we have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the death of Margaret Price, and questions regarding several other deaths under suspicious circumstances." The arrest happened quickly after that. Blackwood went quietly. All fight drained from him. But as the constables led him away, he paused in the doorway, looked back at Genevieve and Alexander. "You think you've won," he said softly, "but society will destroy you for this. A woman who breaks into a gentleman's home, steals his private papers, a man who conspires with his mistress to entrap a peer. They'll call you criminals, liars, worse." "Perhaps," Alexander said calmly, "but you'll be in prison, and we'll be free. I know which I prefer." After Blackwood was removed, the house party dissolved into chaos. Guests demanded explanations. Servants whispered. Cordelia appeared, took charge with remarkable competence, organizing departures and managing the scandal with the efficiency of a general commanding troops. "You two should leave," she said quietly to Alexander and Genevieve. "Now, before the newspapers arrive. They'll twist this into something ugly if you're still here." "Thank you," Genevieve managed. "Don't thank me yet." Cordelia's smile was wry. "What you've done is brave and necessary. It's also going to make you both pariahs for a while. Society doesn't reward people who expose uncomfortable truths, but—" She paused, something warm in her expression. "I think you'll weather it together better than you would alone." The carriage ride back to New York was silent for the first hour. Genevieve sat across from Alexander, both of them bruised and exhausted, adrenaline slowly fading to leave them shaking. Finally, Alexander spoke. "That was unforgivably reckless. You could have been killed." "So could you." Genevieve met his eyes. "You broke down the door, fought an armed man. Don't lecture me about recklessness. I was trying to protect you, and I was trying to gather evidence. We're partners, remember? Equals, which means we're both entitled to take risks for what matters." She held up the diary, now safely tucked in her bag. This matters. Getting justice for Margaret and all the others, that's worth risk. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved across the carriage, sat beside her instead of opposite, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You're right," he said softly. "About everything. Partnership means trusting each other to make our own choices, even dangerous ones." He paused. "I'm sorry I tried to control the situation, to protect you by excluding you. That was wrong." Genevieve felt something shift in her chest. This was growth, real growth, a powerful man acknowledging his mistake without defensiveness or excuses. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat in silence as the carriage rolled through autumn countryside, shoulders touching, the intimacy of shared danger creating a bond deeper than any performance could achieve. "Genevieve," Alexander said eventually, "there's something I need to tell you about this arrangement, about us." Her heart stuttered. "What about us?" "It's not fake anymore." He turned to face her fully. "At least not for me. I don't know when it happened. Maybe during our first conversation in the library. Maybe when you challenged me at Carnegie Hall. Maybe just now when I thought Blackwood might." His voice roughened. "The point is, I'm not pretending. I haven't been for weeks. I'm courting you because I want to. Because when I imagine my future, you're in it." Genevieve couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. All she could do was stare at this complicated, damaged, brilliant man who was offering her something she'd never dared hope for. Real partnership, real love. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "What if this is just adrenaline? Danger creating false intimacy? What if when things are safe and normal, we discover we don't actually suit? Then we'll discover it honestly." Alexander took her hand. "But I don't think that's what will happen. I think we'll discover that partnership forged in crisis becomes even stronger in peace. That intellectual compatibility matters more than shared trauma. That loving someone means choosing them every day, not just in dramatic moments." He slid from the carriage seat, knelt on the floor between the benches, despite the moving vehicle, despite the impropriety, despite everything. "Genevieve Catherine Ashford," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I'm asking you now, not in 6 months when our arrangement expires. Not because of strategy or protection. I'm asking because I love you. Because you make me want to be worthy of you. Because partnership with you is the greatest gift I can imagine." He opened the box. A sapphire ring gleamed inside, deep blue surrounded by small diamonds. Simple, elegant, perfect. "Will you marry me? Really marry me? Not a performance, but a promise?" Tears streamed down Genevieve's face. Happy tears. Terrified tears. Tears of relief and hope and overwhelming emotion. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her, and then he was kissing her. Not the chaste kiss of public performance, but something desperate and real and full of promise. She kissed him back, tasting salt from her tears, feeling his heartbeat race against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, again. "I need you to know that. Whatever happens next, scandal, social censure, my uncle's disapproval. I love you and I choose you. Every day, for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Genevieve whispered. "My impossible, complicated, wonderful partner." They held each other as the carriage carried them toward New York and whatever future they would build together. The scandal broke exactly as Cordelia had predicted. The newspapers had a field day. Railroad magnate conspires with lover to entrap respected businessman. Society beauty caught in compromising investigation. Blackwood arrest raises questions about Sterling's methods. Some publications were more balanced, acknowledging that Blackwood's diary contained genuine confessions. But others insinuated that the evidence had been manufactured, that Alexander and Genevieve were conducting an illicit affair and had framed an innocent man. Alexander's uncle Cornelius arrived at the Sterling townhouse 3 days after their return, his face carved from granite. "You've lost your mind," he announced without preamble, "courting a woman from a bankrupt family, conspiring with her to break into a gentleman's home, creating the biggest scandal New York has seen in a decade." He slammed his walking stick against the floor. "The board of directors is calling for your resignation." Alexander, standing in his study with Genevieve at his side, remained calm. "Let them call." "Let them," Cornelius sputtered. "Do you understand what you're saying? This company is your legacy, your father's legacy. 3 generations of Sterlings have built this empire. And now this Sterling is choosing something more important. Alexander took Genevieve's hand. I'm choosing partnership with a woman who challenges me to be better, who sees injustice and fights it regardless of personal cost, who taught me that legacy means more than accumulated wealth. She's ruined you. No, Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. She's saved me from becoming the kind of man who values profit over human life, from isolation and arrogance, from believing that power exempts me from moral accountability. He met his uncle's furious gaze without flinching. You can have my resignation if you want it, but you should know, I've been approached by 3 other railroad companies, 2 manufacturing concerns, and the governor of Connecticut, who's very interested in discussing comprehensive labor reform legislation. He paused. Turns out exposing a murderer and fighting for justice makes some people trust you more, not less. Cornelius stared at him for a long moment. Then unexpectedly he laughed. It was a rough sound, rusty with disuse but genuine. You sound exactly like your mother, he said finally. Catherine drove me mad with her insistence on funding schools for workers' children. Fought me for years about safety improvements I considered unnecessary expenses. She would have liked this girl. He looked at Genevieve appraisingly. Liked her very much. The tension in the room shifted. Not quite approval, but something like acceptance. Don't resign, Cornelius said gruffly. The board will come around once the trial confirms Blackwood's guilt. And if they don't, he shrugged. I still own 40% of the company. They'll do what I tell them. After he left, Alexander pulled Genevieve into his arms, buried his face in her hair. That went better than expected, he said. Your mother funded schools, and orphanages, and hospital wards. Spent half my father's fortune on charitable projects he considered wasteful. Alexander smiled against her temple. She would have adored you, would have recruited you immediately for her causes. I wish I could have known her. I wish she could have known you. He pulled back slightly, met Genevieve's eyes. But we'll honor her memory together. Build the legacy she wanted, schools and safety standards and systemic change. It was a promise and a proposal and a prayer all at once. The trial of Percival Blackwood began in January 1886, 3 months after his arrest. Connecticut versus Blackwood. The state prosecuting with evidence that seemed overwhelming. The diary, Margaret Price's exhumed body, testimony from his former servants. Genevieve sat in the courtroom gallery every day, Alexander beside her, Rosalind on her other side. They watched as the prosecution built its case methodically, piece by damning piece. Sarah Miller testified, the maid who'd escaped Blackwood's employment after witnessing too much. She described blood on carpets, screams in the night, Blackwood's threats when she asked questions. The coroner who'd examined Margaret's remains testified that the injuries were consistent with drowning, not the pneumonia Blackwood had claimed. Financial experts traced how each wife's death had enriched Blackwood substantially. And through it all, Blackwood sat silent, his lawyers arguing technicalities while the evidence mounted like stones in a cairn. The verdict came on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. We, the jury, find the defendant, Percival Blackwood, guilty of murder in the first degree in the death of Margaret Price. The courtroom erupted. Genevieve felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers. Justice. Finally. Not perfect justice. Blackwood's wives would never be avenged in a court of law, evidence too circumstantial, bodies long buried. But Margaret would have her justice, her memory acknowledged, her death avenged. The judge sentenced Blackwood to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As constables led him away for the final time, Blackwood looked directly at Genevieve. No malice in his expression now, just emptiness. A man who'd believed himself above consequences, finally learning otherwise. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Alexander made a brief statement. Justice was served today, but this case highlights a larger problem, how wealth and power can shield criminals from accountability. My fiancé and I are committed to changing that system, to fighting for laws that protect the vulnerable regardless of social standing. He didn't take questions, just led Genevieve to their waiting carriage. That evening, they attended a quiet dinner at the Ashford home. Just family, Judge and Mrs. Ashford, Rosalind and her father, Cordelia, whom they'd grown to consider a friend. To justice, Judge Ashford raised his glass, and to the brave young people who fought for it when the system failed. To partnership, Genevieve added, meeting Alexander's eyes. In justice, in love, in everything. They were married 6 weeks later. Trinity Church in Manhattan blazed with spring flowers on April 3rd, 1886. 400 guests packed the pews, a mix of old money and new, socialites and reformers, railroad workers and senators. An unusual assembly that reflected the unusual couple being joined. Genevieve walked down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing a gown of ivory silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit her slimmer frame. Simple, elegant, no ostentation, just beauty. Alexander waited at the altar in morning dress, his eyes fixed on her with such open love that several guests dabbed at tears. When they reached the front, the minister asked the traditional question, "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" Judge Ashford surprised everyone. "No one gives her," he said clearly. "She chooses freely, as every woman should." It was revolutionary, radical, perfect. The vows they'd written themselves emphasized partnership, equality, mutual respect. Promises to challenge each other, support each other, choose each other daily. When Alexander slid the sapphire ring onto Genevieve's finger, the same one from his proposal, he spoke words only she could hear. "My partner, my equal, my love." "Forever," she whispered back. The kiss was tender but passionate, a promise of what would come. The congregation applauded as they turned to face friends and family, hands clasped, ready to begin their life together. The reception at the Sterling mansion was elaborate but warm. Speeches celebrating the couple's courage, dancing that mixed waltzes with newer, more energetic styles, food and wine and laughter that lasted late into the evening. But the moment Genevieve remembered most clearly came during a quiet interlude. She and Alexander had stolen away to the library, their place where so much had begun, for a brief respite from celebration. "Nervous about tonight?" Alexander asked softly, pulling her close. "Terrified," Genevieve admitted, "and excited, and grateful, and a dozen other things I don't have words for." "We don't have to. I want to." She met his eyes. "I want everything with you. The intellectual partnership and the physical intimacy and the shared work and the quiet moments. All of it." He kissed her then, slowly, deeply, a promise of what would come when they were finally alone. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, when society's eyes could no longer judge, they came together with a tenderness that surprised them both. Nervous hands and whispered reassurances, learning each other's bodies as they learned each other's minds, with patience and curiosity and growing confidence. Afterward, lying tangled together in lamplight, Genevieve traced the scars Alexander had earned in his fight with Blackwood. "I love you," she said quietly. "My impossible, wonderful, perfectly imperfect partner." "I love you," he answered, "my fierce, brilliant, unworthy of nothing wife." They fell asleep holding each other, beginning their marriage as they intended to continue, as equals, as partners, and as lovers who chose each other freely. 18 months later, October 1887, the Sterling country estate in Connecticut sprawled across 300 acres of rolling hills and woodland. The house itself, purchased after Alexander restructured his business interests to spend more time on legislation, was modest by Gilded Age standards. Only 20 rooms instead of 50, comfortable rather than ostentatious. Genevieve sat in the sun-drenched morning room, documents spread across the table before her. The Connecticut Labor Reform Bill, their bill, written together over 6 months of intensive work, was being debated in the state legislature that afternoon. She was preparing her testimony, making final notes. 18 months of marriage had taught her that partnership meant constant negotiation, balancing Alexander's protective instincts with her need for independence, managing his guilt-driven overwork with her insistence on rest, learning to fight fair and forgive quickly. It had also taught her that love deepened with time, that intellectual compatibility grew richer through shared work, that choosing each other daily was both harder and more rewarding than any romance novel suggested. "Mama, Mama," a small voice accompanied by the patter of rapid footsteps. Evelyn Rose Sterling, Evie, appeared in the doorway, 14 months old, dark curls bouncing as she toddled toward Genevieve with the determined speed of a very small human who'd only recently mastered walking. "Mama!" Evie launched herself at Genevieve's skirts. "Up!" Genevieve scooped her daughter onto her lap, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Evie smelled like powder and milk and something indefinably sweet that was purely her own. The pregnancy had been unexpected. They'd been married only 3 months when Genevieve realized her monthly courses had stopped, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Alexander had been simultaneously thrilled and anxious, haunted by memories of Evelyn's death in childbirth. But Genevieve's pregnancy had been smooth, the delivery swift by medical standards, and Evie had arrived red-faced and screaming, perfectly healthy, absolutely perfect. They'd named her for Alexander's first wife, a gesture of healing, of honoring the past while embracing the future. "Where's Papa?" Genevieve asked. Evie pointed toward the window with chubby fingers. "Garden with men." Genevieve looked out. Alexander stood near the workers' school they'd founded, a beautiful stone building that housed classrooms for both children and adults. 47 students currently enrolled, one for each man lost in the bridge collapse. The symbolism mattered to Alexander. Redemption through education. He was talking with several of the adult students, likely discussing the labor bill, building grassroots support among the workers themselves rather than imposing change from above. That had been one of Genevieve's contributions to their partnership, insisting that reform involved the people it affected, listening to workers' experiences rather than assuming what they needed. The result was legislation that was both practical and progressive: mandatory safety inspections, 8-hour workday, compensation for injuries. Nothing radical by European standards, but revolutionary for Connecticut in 1887. "Mama work?" Evie asked, patting the papers with sticky fingers. "Yes, darling. Mama's preparing to testify before the legislature." "Tiff-I? Tell the senators why this law is important." Genevieve kissed her daughter's cheek. "So other children's papas come home safe every night." Evie didn't understand, but she nodded solemnly, mimicking grown-up seriousness in a way that made Genevieve's heart melt. Alexander appeared in the doorway, dirt on his hands from helping plant autumn bulbs with the students. His hair was graying faster now, silver threading through dark at 38, but his eyes were lighter than they'd been when they'd met. Less burdened, more at peace. "Two of my favorite people," he said, smiling. "Having a strategy session? Evie's helping me practice my testimony." "Excellent choice. She's a very discerning audience." Alexander washed his hands at the basin, then came to kiss first his wife, then his daughter. "How's the preparation going?" "Well, I think, assuming the senators can handle being lectured by a woman. If they can't, that's their limitation, not yours." Alexander's faith in her was absolute, never wavering even when her own confidence faltered. That afternoon, Genevieve testified before the Connecticut State Legislature, the first woman ever allowed to speak on proposed legislation. She stood before 24 middle-aged men in expensive suits and spoke for 40 minutes about worker safety, about dignity, about the moral imperative of protecting those who build America's prosperity. Some senators listened with genuine interest, others with barely concealed disdain. But she spoke her truth clearly. Backed by data Alexander had helped gather, personal stories from workers she'd interviewed, and philosophical arguments that challenged their comfortable assumptions. When she finished, Senator James Patterson, a friend of Alexander's, stood and applauded. Slowly others joined until half the chamber was on its feet. The bill passed 3 weeks later. Not perfectly, compromises had been made, provisions weakened, but it passed. Real law that would save real lives. That evening, Alexander found Genevieve in the library, staring at the official notification. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it. You did it." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her shoulder. "Your testimony swayed the undecided votes. Your research made the case bulletproof. This is your victory." "Ours," she corrected. "Partners, remember?" "Partners," he agreed. "Always." She turned in his arms, kissed him softly. "I'm pregnant again." Alexander went still, then his eyes widened. "Again? Already?" "Apparently, yes," Genevieve smiled. "The doctor confirmed it this morning. Due in June." Fear flickered across his face, the old terror of childbirth, of loss. But it was tempered now by experience, by knowing that pregnancy didn't have to end in tragedy. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Excited, nervous, nauseous in the mornings." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach where their second child grew. "But mostly grateful that we get to do this together, build a family while building a better world." "Boy or girl, do you think? Does it matter?" "Not even slightly." Alexander kissed her forehead. Though Evie would probably prefer a sister to boss around, they stood together in the library where so much had begun. Two people who'd started as adversaries and become partners, who'd pretended courtship and found real love, who'd fought for justice and built a legacy that mattered. "I never thanked you properly," Genevieve said quietly, "for seeing me, for choosing me when society said I was unworthy." "You were always worthy," Alexander said fiercely. "Society was wrong. I was wrong. You were extraordinary all along. We made each other better." "We did." He kissed her properly then, deeply. "We still are. Every day." 5 years later, Spring 1892. The Sterling family had grown. Evelyn Rose was 6 now, precocious and brilliant, already reading philosophy texts that made her father laugh and her mother proud. Theodore James, Theo, was 4, named for Genevieve's father, all boundless energy and curiosity. And baby Catherine, born just 8 months ago, slept peacefully in her cradle, named for Alexander's mother, completing their family. The workers' school had expanded to 3 buildings, 140 students, curriculum that included not just reading and arithmetic, but civics, political philosophy, basic law, preparing the next generation to think critically about power and justice. Alexander had left railroad management entirely, focusing on legislative work. He'd been elected to the Connecticut State Senate, championing labor reform, women's suffrage, educational access, using his privilege to dismantle the systems that protected privilege. Genevieve had become a sought-after speaker on workers' rights and women's education. She'd published 2 books, one on labor law, another on political philosophy for general audiences. Harper's Magazine had commissioned a series of essays. She was building a career that would have been impossible without Alexander's support and partnership. But more than professional success, they'd built something rarer, a marriage of true partnership, intellectual equals who challenged and supported each other, lovers who chose each other daily, parents who were raising children to value justice over comfort. On this particular spring afternoon, they sat in their garden while the children played. Evie was reading aloud to Theo from a storybook. Baby Catherine slept in Genevieve's arms. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked. "Choosing me instead of someone who could have given you an easier life?" Genevieve looked at him in surprise. "Never. Why would you ask?" "Because you've sacrificed so much. Your reputation was damaged by the Blackwood scandal. Your social standing never fully recovered. You're brilliant enough to have been a professor if universities hired women. Instead, you're tied to me and our causes, and—" She kissed him quiet. "I chose you," she said firmly. "I keep choosing you. Not because my options are limited, but because partnership with you is the best choice I can imagine. We're building something that matters, Alexander. Legacy that goes beyond wealth or status. We're changing minds, changing laws, changing the world for our children and everyone else's children." She gestured to their 3 playing nearby. "Evie reads Mill and Wollstonecraft because we taught her to. Theo questions authority because we encourage it. Catherine will grow up in a world we're actively improving. That's not sacrifice. That's purpose, Ubos." Alexander pulled her close, carefully so as not to wake the baby. "I love you," he said quietly. "More now than the day we married. More than I thought possible." "I love you too." Genevieve rested her head on his shoulder. "My partner, my equal, my choice." They sat together as afternoon sunshine painted the garden gold. Their children played. Their work continued. Their love deepened with each passing year. And in the distance, in the workers' school they'd built, a new class was beginning. 47 students learning that their voices mattered, that justice was possible, that the world could change if enough people chose courage over comfort. The legacy wasn't wealth or power. It was this: people choosing to be better, to do better, to build better, together, always together.